Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellknight here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. We are back at it again with more Runeterra content, and we're going to be taking a step back from the janky couple of decks over the last couple of weeks and playing something slightly more competitive. This is Nocphelios Nightfall. Now, even though Aphelios and his assorted cards did take a couple of nerfs over the last patch, I still think that this deck is super fun to play, and it's a little bit more competitive than the last couple of weeks, that is for sure. So let's not waste any more time and go ahead and hop into the card-by-card rundown. Now, the point of this deck is essentially a standard Nightfall deck, so play a card that is not Nightfall and then play a bunch of Nightfall cards following it in order to gain tremendous value. This deck is able to play very low to the ground, very aggressive, and chip in for a ton of damage early on, or it can play a little bit more controlling and try to scale into some of the later game threats that this deck has to offer in the form of Duskbringer and Aphelios himself, and of course, Nocturne. Going ahead and talking about our card by card here, we are running 3 copies of Gifts from Beyond at 1 mana. This did just recently get reduced down to 1 mana because the moon weapons themselves all cost 3 mana now, so that is a net nerf, I would say, but this card still serves its purpose in this deck as a 1 mana burst spell. It enables Nightfall. It allows you to place this at burst speed, get a moon weapon, and then play whatever Nightfall cards you had in mind. It also means that now you have the moon weapon in hand for a potential Nightfall trigger on your next turn, or to immediately get value with it. This card is very good, allowing me to cycle through things like Sky Shadows for lots of value. It's just generally a great card. I really love to see this, and I definitely want to see one in my opening hand. And speaking of cards that I want to see in my opening hand, Lunari Duskbringer is a very useful card in this deck, as she allows me to crash in for 2 on turn 1, assuming I'm able to drop her down. I don't think there's any card in the game that is able to at least not be traded out by Lunari Duskbringer on turn 1, and she creates that Dusk Petal Dust in hand to essentially give me a free Nightfall proc on the next round, or in any subsequent round afterwards. So she essentially gives me 2 Nightfall procs if I see her later in the game, so always excited to see Lunari Duskbringer. 2 copies of Shroud of Darkness. Now, I'm a little hesitant about this one, but it is Nightfall triggers, and it may get cut at some point, so we'll see, but generally speaking, I'm still happy with how this works, as it enables Nightfall on the turn I play it, of course, and it also protects one of my powerful cards as it comes down. So if I'm playing out the Duskbringer, or if I'm playing out the Aphelios, I can give them that spell shield for at least that first turn of defense and that first turn of safety, and maybe a little bit of extra damage if my opponent isn't willing to block out on them. 3 copies of Stygian Onlooker. Now, I know there's a lot of 1 mana cards in this deck, but that's because this deck is designed to come out fast and hard, and also I want a lot of 1 mana cards in order to enable my Nightfall without having to spend a ton of mana to do it. But either way, Stygian Onlooker is another early card that I can play out aggressively. It's either a 2-1 that I can swing in with on turn 1, no problem, or if I have a Nightfall trigger on the next turn, if I am on the evens, for example, then I can play my first card, then play Stygian Onlooker, and it turns into a 4-1 with Fearsome, which essentially just guarantees 4 damage on that round, unless my opponent's willing to burn a removal spell, but I paid 1 mana for this guy, so I don't really care too much, so definitely like how he works in the early stages of the game, and definitely looking forward to seeing either him or Duskbringer in my opening hand. Finally, for the 1 mana cards, I have 1 copy of The Flight. Now, this is a bit of an experiment. I'm not sure how I feel about The Flight as a whole, but it is kind of useful to open because I'm able to get in for that early elusive damage, draw a card, and then shuffle him back into the top 3 cards of the deck that for me to redraw later and potentially get in for a little bit more damage. Having the constant elusive damage as well is pretty nice, though of course there will be some rounds where I'll draw The Flight and not really care about it too much, so we'll see. I like him well enough right now, but I may cut him in the future for something else. Moving up to the 2 mana mark, we have 2 copies of Pale Cascade. This is a crazy good card. I think if you're in Targon, you pretty much run Pale Cascade, as it gives you just that little tiny edge, either offensively or defensively, to get your unit to stay alive, or to get it to trade out with something else. And if you have that Nightfall trigger, it's even replacing itself, so you're not even losing anything off of the card play. So really tremendously good card, and honestly, I'm surprised I'm not running 3 copies. I probably should change that before we go into game, but we'll see. I'll play it at 2 and see how the deck does. 3 copies of Stalking Shadows. Now, this card is very useful for a variety of purposes. It allows the Nightfall deck to reload on its units, which Nightfall tends to cycle through its units very quickly because we're playing super aggressively and just trading out. This lets me not only refill my hand with a unit and create an ephemeral copy of that unit, but also it is a Nightfall trigger. So if I'm able to play Stalking Shadows into something like a Doombeast, I'm playing 2 Doombeasts for a total of an 8 life swing on both of those Doombeasts. So definitely a really good card for me to have, and that's why it's at 3 copies. 3 copies of the Sky Shadows, and if you're doing your math, you'll notice this is the only 2-cost unit that I have in the deck. That's because the Sky Shadows is summonable off of its own moon weapon, Crescendum, and because once Crescendum has been played, it summons the Sky Shadows, that immediately refills the 2 spell mana if I behold a Nightfall card. Now, This used to synergize so much better before the recent nerfs, where Sky Shadows would entirely make up for its cost as it comes down, which if you have multiple crescendoms meant that you could essentially cycle through and play out a ton of Sky Shadows. It's a little bit weaker now. You do need a minimum of 4 mana in order to get the Sky Shadows into crescendum into Sky Shadows, which is a little disappointing, but I can't complain too much, as the deck needed to be nerfed in some form, and that was essentially a casualty of it. But either way, it's still a very powerful effect to be able to cycle through like that, because I get a bunch of 3/1s for 2 mana, which allows me to play fairly aggressively early on, which I do quite like. 3 copies of Unspeakable Horror. Now, this allows me to drain 1 from anything, making it a very similar card to Vile Feast, but if I'm able to play it on a Nightfall trigger, it also creates a non-champion Nightfall card in hand. Now, this isn't always necessarily a good thing. Sometimes you do get the Nightfall Dragon, which is really not what you want to see in this deck at all in some situations, but just the fact that it replaces itself in general is still useful, as it allows you to get that little tiny bit of extra damage in to trade out with the unit, and then replaces itself at the same time, so I do sort of like how it plays in the deck. Our first champion card in the deck is Aphelios. Now, Aphelios used to be very, very strong. He has taken a couple of nerfs, so time will tell if he's going to retain his throne as one of the best champions in the game, but he's a very, very fun champion to play regardless, due to how flexible he can be, choosing the right moon weapons for the job and trying to cycle through them the best you can. Obviously, you need to play him on a Nightfall trigger in order to get a moon weapon in the first place, but if you have copies of Gift from Beyond or have played it earlier in the game, you're not altogether that worried, because that will allow you to start cycling once the Aphelios hits the battlefield. He does let you cycle through, and he's a very powerful win condition if you are able to get him flipped, as suddenly he turns into a quick attacker and reduces the cost of all of your moon weapons, so you can really cycle through it even faster. So definitely love to see this guy, and would love to see him down on turn 3 or turn 4. 3 copies of Doombeast are here. They're very powerful cards for helping to end the game quicker, as playing with them with a Nightfall trigger results in a 4 life swing. It lets you top up against an opponent who's also playing aggressively, while also simultaneously getting their life lower, and maybe cheesing in for that little last extra bit of damage that you need in order to finish them off. Great card all around. Would love to see this guy as well. 3 copies of Nocturne. Now, Nocturne, I'm a bit iffy on. I do feel like this deck may play better with the Diana instead, as Nocturne, I feel like, is just not very reliable. He's very removable by a lot of threats, and his ability doesn't protect him as well as something like Ash's ability does, for example, but he can still be very powerful by granting an enemy vulnerable permanently and giving enemies -1/-0 the round he comes down, as long as I have a Nightfall trigger, which is very powerful indeed. The biggest thing here is if I am able to flip him, he gives all other allies fearsome, and when I play a unit, enemies get -1/-0, turning Nocturne into a very scary win condition if I can transform him, and then play out a hand of units, depowering all of my opponent's units and preventing them from blocking anybody because, well, everything has fearsome. So definitely a very powerful card. I do kind of wonder, oh, why do I run this guy? And then I get him flipped in a game, and I'm like, oh, that's why. So we are going to be staying at 3 for him. 3 copies of the Veiled Temple, another Aphelios card that was crazy good that has been nerfed recently. The Veiled Temple pumps the strongest ally by +1/+0. It used to give health as well, which was silly, so no longer does. And it also refills 2 mana whenever you play 2 other cards each round. This makes it a very good way of pumping up your offensive threats to make them even stronger, and the fact that it refills mana means that you're able to play out even more cards, and Nightfall is all about playing a single basic Nightfall trigger into even more Nightfall cards. So definitely Veiled Temple is one of those very powerful cards for enabling me to play even more units out on a same turn, so definitely love to see this guy. Though sometimes playing it is a tempo drop, so I won't always play this immediately as I draw it, but it's a very powerful card if I can get it to stick. 2 copies of Duskrider. And this is a 5 mana 2/5 fearsome, which initially seems bad until you read its Nightfall text, which grants it +1/+0 for every time we've activated Nightfall this game. This potentially makes it a very powerful finisher for this deck, as if I'm able to trigger Nightfall constantly throughout the game, he can come down as a 7/5 or even 8/5 on occasion that essentially can't be chump blocked, either allowing him to trade out with some of the big fat fatties that my opponents played, or just start stomping all over my opponent's Nexus. I don't necessarily want to see every single copy of this card, because I do feel like it can be dealt with fairly easily, but it is a threat under the right circumstances that my opponent will have to deal with. 1 copy of Moonlight Affliction. Now, this is a bit of a sideboard and tech card that I've been trying out, as sometimes this is a total brick, but other times this card will just end the game due to the Nightfall trigger that prevents the affected units from blocking. Obviously, a double silence is still very effective against some decks that rely on heavily pumping up a single unit or champion. Shyvana decks, for example, are really, really scared of this card in particular, but getting the can't block trigger allows you to go wide with a ton of Nightfall cards and just swing in for the win if you're able to get it to stick. So definitely a good card, but again, sometimes it's a brick, so I'm only going to run it at 1 copy. Finally, 2 copies of the Cloven Way at 5 mana. Cloven Way, I think, is a very, very powerful card here. As a 5/4 with Overwhelm, you can sort of trample over some of your opponent's smaller units, but it also, its Nightfall trigger stuns an enemy and keeps it stunned at the beginning of the next round if it's a follower. This allows you to play it at the end of your opponent's turn, stun their biggest threat, and then that threat remains stunned as the next round begins and you get the attack token. So it does have some degree of flexibility in that regard. You can play it defensively, but it's also another good finishing closer here for the deck. And that's going to be it, guys, for the deck breakdown here. Like I said, it's a pretty simple deck. We're going to be going out fast and hard and trying to end some games and potentially doing some Aphelios shenanigans. So go ahead and stay tuned, and we're going to be hopping right into the queue. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We are in game with Terra Artemis playing the Shurima Ascended deck. Very similar in appearance to the deck I played last week, so I would expect it to be very similar cards, maybe a little bit more optimized than mine. And this is a pretty decent starting hand. We will mulligan away one of the Lunari Duskbringers as I want more of the benefits, but unfortunately we're going to come down with the Stygian Onlooker, which is not that great, but we can get in for some early aggression, at least on this turn. Now, Nightfall decks, I usually like being on the even rounds instead of the odd rounds, as that allows me to bank a little bit of mana and then swing in. My opponent's willing to play out the Dunekeeper here just to prevent some early damage, which honestly is fine by me because you lose a lot of that card's value if he's not able to swing in with the Sand Soldier. So honestly, I'm totally fine with this. He also didn't play the Buried Sundisk, so either he feels very confident about his ability to get the Sundisk down later and tick it down. Okay, there it is. He's finally going to come out with it here. And I do feel like, honestly, I don't necessarily need to go super aggressive. I can bank this mana and then do some shenanigans on the next turn. So see if he wants to swing in. He does have mana for Exhaust if he wants to play it, but I do have an answer. I'm just going to take this damage because I do have the Doombeast in hand to heal it back up in a little bit later. And banking this mana allows me to get off to the races here on turn 3. We do have a Shroud of Darkness, but I think it makes sense here to use the Dusk Petal Dust. We'll pop this, and we're going to go ahead and bring up the Stygian Onlooker, which costs 0 because of that dust, which allows me to play all the rest of these Nightfall cards essentially for free on this turn. He will come out with the Aspiring Chronomancer, neither of which can block the Stygian Onlooker, by the way, as this is a 4/1 Fearsome, and they're both 2 costs. We will go ahead and start swinging in and see what he wants to do, as I can respond with either the Pale Cascade or the Unspeakable Horror, whichever I'd prefer, depending on if he blocks or how he blocks. He will go ahead and block out with the Chronomancer, so we're going to go ahead and go for the Drain here, as I feel like the Pale Cascade is a slightly better card, and I would much rather hold on to that and keep the just use the Unspeakable Horror. So we'll heal off a little bit of that damage. We got a Duskrider off the proc, which isn't that great, but hey, I can't complain too much. It is a free card at the end of the day, and we can go ahead and pass the round back and keep that 2 spell mana banked. No champions yet, but hoping to see one. We're drawing into another Duskrider. Again, not great, but I can't complain too much. And we have the 3/3 Xenotype Researchers. I don't know that I necessarily want to play the Doombeast yet. Now we will, because we have the Stalking Shadows to enable him. And into the Lunari Duskbringer. It's the only card I have the ability to grab. So we'll play out the Doombeast. We'll go ahead and get in for a little bit of value off of his Drain. And now if my opponent wants to swing, we have the ability to trade out. Unfortunately, I don't have mana for Pale Cascade left up, so that's a little disappointing. But if he develops a little bit further, I can play this Ephemeral Lunari Duskbringer and sit on that Dusk Petal Dust for later. So I have a lot of enablers right here. He's definitely got a combat trick. I feel like there's no reason he would be swinging in like this, except that he doesn't. So either he didn't have them or he was unwilling to play them. So we'll just come out with the Lunari Duskbringer, pick up that Dusk Petal Dust, and we have the ability to punch him for 2 at the start of this next round. The Duskriders are now 5/5s, and we have the Aphelios, which is quite nice, but I don't feel like I need to play him immediately. We'll just get in for some free damage right now and see what my opponent wants to come out with. He hasn't played any of his champions, which is pretty bad for this deck. Well, speak and you shall have it. That is the Renekton here. So let me go ahead and do a Shroud of Darkness into the Aphelios, as this will allow me to pick up a Moon Weapon. I will take the Crescendum here for next turn in order to maybe try and start cycling through some Sky Shadows. I probably actually should have played the Dusk Petal Dust there, as the Spell Shield isn't giving me too much of an advantage on this turn, but I was really hoping my opponent wouldn't have any kind of combat tricks to deal with the Aphelios on this turn. I would guess he's sitting on an Exhaust here, or a Ruthless Predator to grab the Aphelios with and just kind of murder him. There's the Exhaust naturally. And I don't think there's any way for me to save the Aphelios because of the depowering. Even if I'm able to play the Pale Cascade, it only gives +1/+1, so I just have to kind of let him die here, which is very unfortunate, especially given that the Renekton is getting to strike. We will go ahead and pop the Crescendum here, though, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. I will take the... I think I do want the Severum here for a little bit of extra sustain. And assuming he doesn't want to write him Negation, we will automatically get out the Sky Shadows and replenish some of that mana. And you kind of see how that works. We will get a Golden Ambassador, draw an extra card, which is very nice for him. We're on the evens here, so I don't have to play out my hand too bad, but I will Stalking Shadows at least because I do want to try and find some more of these cards. We'll go ahead and take the Sky Shadows because I can play this and replenish my spell mana twice, which is very good. So we will play out the Sky Shadows, get some of that mana back, and into the Aspiring Chronomancer. The biggest problem I'm going to have right now is dealing with that Renekton. So I believe at this point it may make sense to bring out a Duskrider. It'll be a 6/5, easily big enough to deal with Renekton, assuming, of course, he doesn't have any combat tricks of his own. Obviously, being in this Shurima deck, he has access to Quicksand, which I have harped on at length about. So we're going to go ahead and pop our Shroud of Darkness here into one of the Duskriders. That's right, neither one of them was generated by Stalking Shadows, so neither is vulnerable, and he's actually going to be quite large, so my opponent does have to be scared of him. Into the Azir, who is a 6/10! He was able to get the pump off of the Golden Ambassador. What else is he pumped with? These Xenotype Researchers! Oh my goodness! And here I thought I had everything under control, and all of a sudden, that is a big deal for me, but... So unfortunately, the big turn that I wanted to have is not really going to happen because of how large that Azir is. That is absolutely crazy, but we're going to go ahead and go for a swing regardless. I need to try and keep pressure on my opponent. If I just sit back and pass the turn, he will get the Azir flip. The Renekton may flip on the next turn if he's sitting on an exhaust. He's just going to try and chump out here because he's very worried about me having combat tricks, which makes sense. It does mean that if he swings with the Azir on the next turn, my Duskrider can't kill it, so I think it makes sense to just kind of let this resolve as is. Get at least a little bit of damage on the Azir, make him vulnerable, and we will at least trade out with one of his units thanks to the big old Duskrider that I've been able to summon. So, can pass the round back here. He is going to lose the Spell Shield and the very small pump, but he's still a 7 power card. We have the Aphelios in hand as well here, and while I would like to play him in order to find the Gravitum, I don't feel like that's going to help because the Renekton will just grab him and challenge him, and if that's another exhaust, there's really nothing I can do, but I guess he can always grab the Duskbringer as well, so... We will Dusk Petal Dust out into the Aphelios here, and we definitely can't be taking Crescendum. I've seen most of my Sky Shadows at this point, so we do want the Gravitum to try and stop one of my opponent's champions from swinging in for the Dome. I do have a very slight hand advantage, but this deck is very strong in the late game, so... And the Siphoning Strike, that's a huge card to have access to here. This will not get the Renekton flipped unless I've missed my math. But it does make him very large and very scary. So we're going to have to stun the Renekton to try and forestall the damage that's coming to the face. I will take the Crescendum. I don't remember if I've seen all of my Sky Shadows, but at least being able to cheese another one out will be quite good. See if I'll let this resolve. He's actually sitting on the Rite of Negation, so he'll kill off his Free Sand Soldier to stop that card from being played, which is very good. I believe this does prevent me from phasing a card as well. If he's sitting on the Exhaust as well, he doesn't have it, so Renekton is just going to be open swinging. And unfortunately, I don't have a way to... I don't think I have a way out of this, because no matter how I block on the Renekton, I'm going to be taking some damage off of that. I have to chump the Azir. This is going to be 8 damage. This is going to be another 4 damage, which is very unfortunate for me. So... Really, I think I've just lost at this point. The Renekton is going to flip as well. He's going to get to the tier 3, so there's actually nothing I can do at this point. The game is going to be over because even though I don't die immediately, his Sun Disk is going to flip. He's going to get all of his champions to flip, and because I don't want to subject you guys to the giant cutscene that we're about to watch, I am going to drop the surrender because both of his champions are going to flip, and the game is over. I don't think there's any play I can make that would get me to the victory at that point because of... just how big his board is and because I've kind of played out what my hand is. So that's unfortunate, but I feel like I did the best I could having not seen the early aggression that I really needed. So unfortunately, we're not going to get the win there, but we are going to be hopping into another game here to try and make it happen. Okay, everybody, welcome back. We're here against Vinkatatsu, who is playing an interesting take on Battle Scars. That's also running the Darius potentially as a win condition here. We're milking away the Cloven Way in the hopes for more early aggression. We are on the evens, which I do quite like, as I've mentioned before, and we're sitting on a Gifts from Beyond plus Aphelios, which will really allow me to start cycling through those Sky Shadows. We've also drawn into the Nocturne, so this opening hand is actually quite good. We'll come out with the Lunari Duskbringer, because this is something that will allow me to just prevent from taking the 1 damage from the Bloodletter, which he's willing to swing with. So honestly, I'm fine to take this trade. I feel like that card would have been significantly better if he'd have held on to it and allowed it to get its value with other Battle Scars units, but maybe he didn't have any of that in hand, so either way, it's not going to happen. And honestly, I'm just going to bank the spell mana here, and so will he. I don't really have anything I can play on that turn. I can't play Aphelios and get his Nightfall trigger, so I'll come out with the Curator. So I'm a little tempted to play the Dusk Petal Dust into the Stygian Onlooker just for something to block this guy, because I really don't want to be taking that damage. So we'll play this out. We'll play out the Onlooker into the Nightfall trigger. So he will be large enough that he can block the Crimson Curator. Now, my opponent may be sitting on Elixir of Iron, which would make me quite sad, but he doesn't actually have it. So we'll play the Aphelios here. We're going to go ahead and pick up a Crescendum, because if I'm able to play the Gifts from Beyond as well, get another Crescendum, then on the next turn I will have 4 mana. Unfortunately, that's not quite enough, I don't think, but see if we can't pull that off. So we're going to cast the Crescendum here. Try to go get a Sky Shadows. We will take the Calibrum, as I do want to be able to shoot that guy to death if I can. I'm sitting on... And actually, we will get it. So we do have the replenishment. I can play this to go get another one, and then that will allow me to come down with a second Sky Shadows and still have mana then left up for the Unspeakable Horror. So you kind of see the strength of that combo. He's got another Crimson Curator, and he's holding on to 3 mana. So we'll go ahead and Gifts from Beyond. We have gotten the Calibrum in hand now. We will take the second Crescendum, though, which we then will go ahead and play, because this is going to really allow me to flood the board. Going to put the Calibrum back in hand, or back in the phase as well. And my opponent is finally going to play something. He's going to go for the Culling Strike. He knows this is getting out of hand too quick, but either way, we're still playing out 2/3 power units, which is quite nice for me. We can go ahead and swing in. I can't swing with him because I don't want them to get any value in case he does block. And he's out of mana now, so these guys are just dying, or he's taking 6, which is really good because this card is one of the ways the deck is sort of able to recover and build up more units as they're sort of trading out. So if I can kill them without allowing them to survive damage, then I'm essentially plussing myself. On to 5 mana now. He is going to come down with Scargrounds, but at only 2 mana, I feel like the best thing I can do is just go for the Calibrum, kill off the Crimson guy, Crimson Curator. That's what I wanted to say, but he's just going to die. That's really good for me. I do have the second Aphelios now sitting in hand, and he will come down with the Crimson Bloodletter, which is not scary at all. So here comes the second Aphelios. At this point, I only have 1 Sky Shadows left, but I think I will still take the Crescendum just to get it out. And Aphelios is very close to flipping here as well. So I believe on the next turn, my best play is likely going to be Shroud of Darkness into Nocturne. So we'll go ahead. Unfortunately, we only have 1 target for his ability, but either way, it gives him something he can swing on for free. I have a bunch of Nightfall cards I can attack with, which unfortunately we've made no progress on Nocturne's quest at all. I don't have any mana for the Crescendum either, which is kind of sad, but not else you can do. And this will actually be the bit of a combo here, so that's kind of nice. I believe, though, we can come down to the Stygian Onlooker. And this is going to be 4 units swinging towards Nocturne's quest, assuming my opponent doesn't play anything else to affect this state. And we're even on hand advantage, but he's got a card here he's going to play out. It's going to be Ice Shard. So this is actually quite good for him, as he's going to kill off the majority of my board and essentially just make his units all tough, which is very sad for me, but he doesn't actually damage the Nocturne thanks to his own ability, and this is actually going to really shut me down from doing what I wanted to do, which is swing with a ton of units and really make progress on Nocturne's quest. So we're only going to swing with 1 unit, but at least we're removing an enemy's card. And I technically have a very slight hand advantage now. We have the final Gifts from Beyond. Actually, all I have to do is play this Crescendum, and Aphelios is going to flip. We have another Kindly Tavern Keeper, which he'll play instead. We'll go for the Crescendum. This will give me a free block. I'm going to take the Severum this time in order to pump up the health of my units, which is starting to look kind of bad here. And this will be the Aphelios flip. He's now seeing the 4 cards. One of my favorite flip animations as well. So he is now a 4/2 with quick attack, as he's taking a little bit of damage. I think, really, I just kind of let this happen. I can block out on the Kindly Tavern Keeper here. I don't care about that too much, and I'll take the 5 off of this guy. Opponent, of course, is sitting on a bunch of mana, so he may have a response for me. Or he may be willing to let it go. Aphelios at least is big enough now that he can't die to Culling Strike, which I do quite like. My opponent, though, he's only sitting on 2 cards in hand, 4 mana, none of his champions quite yet. He will go for the Transfusion. Okay, so he's going to pump up his other card, which unfortunately, that means he's just going to be able to trade out because there's nothing else I was able to do. I can, however, drop the Cloven Way at the end of his turn. We are going to be able to stun this guy both this turn and the next turn, so he won't be able to block, and this guy will die to any of the units that attack into him. And just for fun, we're going to go ahead and get a Gifts from Beyond, go fishing for a Gravitum, as I can play this on the other unit, and we can try to just get in for as much damage as possible. 3 mana left. It is a card he can play, and that's essentially why the game was kind of stalled there for a second. We have another Nocturne in hand. We might be able to bait him with this, so we will just drop the Gravitum and essentially say, hey, what do you have? I will take, I believe, Inferno. That's the only one I really care about as I've cycled through all of my Sky Shadows at this point. Stun up the Kindly Tavern Keeper so he has no blocks unless he can play a unit. He's got the Avalanche, which is really tragically sad for me, but at the very least, the Nocturne is going to come down and be fine. Because, fortunately, I do have this second Nocturne in hand, so we'll grab the bigger one with his effect. I don't know that I want to have the Nocturne grab him, though. I believe we will have the Cloven Way. Alternatively, we could just get in for some damage here, as this is going to be quite beefy. We're going to go ahead and play this out. Take the second Gravitum here. Aphelios being down is a little sad, and my hand's advantage has now been depleted, so I'm really hoping to get a big turn here. He's still sitting on a card there. It's something he can play, but it must be quite situational. I feel like the biggest thing for me to do here is to not bother trying to grab a unit and kill it, and just try to go for the dome and get in as much damage as we can, as this is 11 damage, and it'll also recover me 6 life, so this is a pretty big swing. It's Troll Chant. Okay, so he's going to get the slightly less damage. I'll get slightly less health, but it's still a pretty big swing for me, and Troll Chant is not permanent, so they will lose those bonuses at the end of the turn. He's still stunned because of Gravitum. I have Stalking Shadows to help me reload the hand, which is a huge deal. I'm tempted to just take the damage on this again, but I believe I will block just to kind of trade out with this guy who's starting to get very large. Sadly, Unspeakable Horror does not do a whole lot for me right now, and he did have the combat trick. Unfortunate. So this is just going to be my unit dying, and this is the silly part about Scargrounds, is that it can trigger every single time the unit survives damage. I will take the Doombeast here, I believe. So we will play out the Doombeast here. We're going to get in for a little bit of a drain. And on the flip on my turn, we can at least play the Unspeakable Horror, drain his life for 1, and then play out the other Doombeast. We have another Stalking Shadows, though, so we'll go fishing again, but we miss. We completely whiff. That's really tragic, but either way, we will have another Doombeast to continue to keep the pressure on his life total. Nocturne will level up without me having to actually swing with the Nocturne himself, so we will just go ahead and do this. I will challenge here to just try and finish him. Nocturne is going to get the transform, which is quite good. I do have 1 Nocturne left in the deck, so even if I have to block out with this one in particular, I still have another one that I can go fishing for. This is a free block for him. There's no reason for him to not do this. The question is what's in the hand. He's played 2 Troll Chants, but he doesn't have the third. His guy will get another pump. But at least we're trading out with a bigger one here, so. And now passing it back, and that Stalking Shadows whiff was really tragic on my end. I have the third Stalking Shadows, so we can go digging yet again. Bjerg is quite good here. He will be able to get a free unit off of this. We'll Stalking Shadows into not really much, unfortunate. So I'll take the flight, which, especially given our Nocturne works, I will play this out, as this will allow me to depower his units very slightly. Into Tarkaz the Tribeless, who's a very good card for that deck, as essentially now that his units are tough, Tarkaz's attack trigger does nothing, and it means that he's always able to trigger off of himself. We'll play the flight out in order to just weaken the amount of damage that I may take. Now, he will get a +1/+0. He actually will not do anything, so that's why he's taking back that block. And the Tarkaz, unfortunately, will kill anything that blocks him. But this is an elusive flight in the first place, so I feel like there's no reason to not do this. Except for the fact that he's just going to take one and die instantly. So I'm going to block Tarkaz so I take as little damage as possible. Because Tarkaz, without Overwhelm, will be able to damage my Nexus. So we will take 5 off of this. I do have this flight in order to try and swing in and maybe draw myself a card and maybe find something that can dig me out of the hole here. A Veiled Temple is quite good. We will go ahead and drop that. And I just need a little bit more damage. I can get in for 2 here. If I'm able to find another Doombeast, that would be quite good. The Braum is very tragic here. But the only thing he'll be able to challenge is the Nocturne. So assuming I don't die on the backswing, we do have a choice. But we're drawing into another Unspeakable Horror, which you just do not want to see at all. We'll drain my opponent, though, as this will allow me to get a card off of it. And it will trigger my Veiled Temple, as this is now the second card that I played. We have Lunari Shadestalker, who this would have been a game-ending card if I'd have gotten it before going for attacks, unfortunately. We'll play her out just so I have a second blocker. And on the off chance I'm able to structure combat in such a way as to not die instantly, we are going to draw the flight again, then I can potentially use her plus this Unspeakable Horror in my hand to go for the win. I've got this flight back as well. He was shuffled onto the top of my deck. See what my opponent is going to come out with. He's got an Ice Shard, which is really sad for me, as this is going to enable all of his units now to have the tough trigger and the bonus from Scargrounds, in addition to getting the Poro out here as well. I actually don't think there's a way for me to win at this point. It's going to be a lot of damage coming to the dome here, so we'll see how he tries to structure combat here. We do at least have the very small debuff here from Nocturne to try and save, and I need to keep at least one of my elusive cards alive. He's got another combat trick, though. He has the Scorched Earth, so I don't actually have the ability to keep my units alive here. Well, actually I do, because this isn't going to go through until after Nocturne has already, quote-unquote, blocked and kept me alive. This is going to be, everyone's going to take an extra damage and therefore do 1 extra damage. So this will be 3, 4, 11, sorry, 12. So this is lethal. So I do have to block with one of these cards. So I'll block with the one that's slightly easier to kill in the first place. And essentially, and he has no more combat tricks. So if I've done my math appropriately, I should just be able to go to combat on the next turn with Shadestalker, and assuming he doesn't have a Scorched Earth or any other form of removal, I win the game. So he's thinking about it, but he has nothing he can do. Yeah, so he will just let it happen. So he will get everyone pumped up here. Nocturne will die, but because Nocturne died while he was blocking, Tarkaz does no damage. We take a bunch, we go down to 3, but again, unless my opponent has a removal spell for the Lunari Shadestalker, we have the game. I feel like what I want to do, I can't actually trigger the Nightfall proc for Unspeakable Horror, so we just go for it, and we got it! We're able to get through at the very end. The Shadestalker was enough, and we held on just long enough. Yeah, you see the power there of Scargrounds. Very, very effective card, but we were able to kind of cycle through. We were able to build up enough of an advantage and get them low enough that, so by the time that we started losing control of the game, it wasn't enough for my opponent, and we were able to sort of cheese it out there at the very, very end. His top deck was not something that was going to help him, so have to be happy about that. So we were able to cheese that one out, but now we'll see if we can actually have a 2-in-1 episode as opposed to a 1-in-2 episode. So I'll see you guys in Game 3. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen, back at it for Game 3. This time against another Shurima Ascended deck. This time he's eschewing the Nasus in exchange for a more refined deck, which I can definitely respect. This is an interesting starting hand, but I do feel like I need a little bit more early aggression, especially given that I have no Nightfall cards for the Sky Shadows to actually trigger off of, so we'll mulligan away the higher cost cards. We have the Stygian Onlooker, which is not great, but if I bank the spell mana on turn 1, I can play Gifts from Beyond into Stygian Onlooker, and then be able to swing in for that fearsome damage, follow that up with the Sky Shadows on the next turn, refill that spell mana, get the Nightfall card, hoping to see another champion. And this guy's actually got his Beta Poro, so I do appreciate that. This will probably be Sundisk turn 1 as he's on the play. And of course, it will be the Sundisk turn 1. He's not doing the aggressive play like my opponent did in the last game, but that's because I didn't come out with a unit, so no reason for him to do so. I'm on the evens again, which I do like. We'll go ahead and Gifts from Beyond. Pick up the Crescendum. I do have 2 Sky Shadows in my hand, but this will allow me to find the third one and start flooding the field. And I don't believe there's anything he has that can actually block it because it's fearsome. So he's playing out a 1-mana card, but he actually won't get any value again from the Sand Soldier. So he's just going to disappear, and I'm still swinging in for 4, which is quite nice. And now I have the Stygian Onlooker to just kind of trade out. We have Unspeakable Horror as well. I do appreciate that. Into Preservarium. So really going for kind of the hand sculpting later stages of the game. We'll go ahead and play this. Grab the Calibrim for some removal. And that's going to bring out the Sky Shadows, refill my spell mana. He's got an Ancient Preparation, so really going on this sort of control-y, sculpting the top of the deck, but he is in Shurima, so there is a limit to what he's actually got in regards to control options. We're just going to go ahead and play this Unspeakable Horror out. It will replace itself, so I don't feel too bad about doing this right now. But he's got a Shaped Stone. He's willing to play it this early. I do feel like that's a mistake, as I'm still going to get my value, and I can still trade out with this card. Unfortunately, I am going to get Nevershade Stalker, which is one of the cards I'm not a big fan of. And he's going to pass it back, so he just wanted to preserve his unit for whatever reason. Which I guess I can't fault him with too much. I would love to come down with a Nocturne, but I don't have a Nightfall trigger for him. So we will play out Sky Shadows instead. Refill that spell mana. We can play out the other Sky Shadows. Actually, he's got the Xenotype. Now, I'm tempted, and I think I'm going to do this. We will just go ahead and play out the Moonlight Affliction in order to prevent the blocks and just get in for as much damage as possible. As this is going to put him on a bit of a clock. And here's hoping the Xenotype researchers have not pumped up the Azir again. Finally got his Clockling, and the Preservarium have gone away, so his board is now mostly open for him to play units. He does have the Azir, and of course the Xenotype researchers have given it the buff, which is very, very sad for me. But what can you do? We'll play out the other Sky Shadows, refill a bit of that spell mana, and here comes the swing. We will have to try and deal with this the best we can. I do think this Doomkeeper is fine to leave alive. I will block out on the Azir just to try and get as much damage onto him as possible. And we can afford to take some damage at this point because we're still at 20. So obviously he has a bit of a card advantage at this point. Not to mention he has a champion and I'm still waiting to see my first. But nothing I can do here. And we'll just go ahead and pass the turn back. We only have 3 Nightfall procs for the Duskrider, but we can Stalking Shadows, so we're going to go ahead and, I guess, take the Flight, as that's the only option I have available. And we can go ahead and Nocturne out and grab the Azir here. The Depower means that Nocturne will still get killed if he swings for the Azir, but it's worth it, I think, just trying to trade out with Azir, given how big he is. See what my opponent is thinking. This is, unfortunately, a Siphoning Strike, which I have no answer to. He's going to get the kill. He's going to get the champion pump. And I think the biggest reason I'm a little salty about all of this is that the last week I played this deck and it didn't do nearly this well, but both times I played against it today, this dude's deck has been firing on all cylinders. So either way, we're going to try and just cheese out a win here at the very end by just swinging in with these Flights. They're going to shuffle themselves back into the top of the deck. They're also going to give me 2 cards. I'm going to pick up the Nocturne, which is good for me. We'll go ahead and pop the Gifts from Beyond and just sit on the Graviton. I've already cycled through all of my Sky Shadows at this point, so there's no reason to grab more Crescendums. And pass the turn back here. I am in for a beating. I believe all of his units are just going to swing for me. I've got top decked into a Flight. That totally makes sense, given that I have 2 somewhere in the top 3 cards of my deck. He's only got another Preservarium, though, so he'll draw himself that card. I'm going to go ahead and Graviton out the Azir, just so he can't swing with that. Now, Azir is not going to be stunned for 2 turns. He'll just be stunned this turn, but as long as he's not swinging, I'm pretty happy as I can trade out with the Bakai Sand Spinner if it goes for the Dome. He's got his Ancient Preparations to, again, get that prediction going. He's got the Preservarium as well to start some card draw. I'm tempted here to play the Nocturne. I feel like it makes sense to just get the Nocturne on the board. Obviously, my opponent's still sitting on a bunch of mana, but at least will limit how much damage he'll be able to do to me. Also, the Bakai Sand Spinner now being vulnerable means I can grab it with the Sky Shadows and kill it on the next turn. Nocturne has not made a lot of... and that's an unfortunate turn of events, sitting on the second Bakai Sand Spinner, so we'll be able to swing in, grab the Nocturne, as unfortunately he's vulnerable. I'm not going to bother blocking the Sand Soldier, so the second Nocturne is going to go down, and I'm going to take a little bit more damage here on the backside, but I do have a bit of a plan, and it's essentially going to rely on these Flights putting in work. So here we go. See if my opponent has the removal for them or any way to stop the damage that's going to be coming. He does have a 9/9 Renekton, and this is going to be the Azir flip as well, so pretty bad for me, but if I'm able to at least survive one more turn, we do have the potential to do something. Second Flight is going to come down. I could play out the Eyeshade Stalkers. He doesn't actually have enough blocks. His board is full. So here comes the Eyeshade Stalker. Nightfall trigger is going to give me another one. We'll play it. We'll get another one. And he's doing the math right now. He's trying to figure out if he has the ability to survive this if I play out the last. He's got something in hand, obviously. He's sitting on 4 mana. That could be Rite of Negation. There could be a Quicksand in there. But we're sitting on a full board here. He only has 3 blocks. Only 3 creatures have to connect to kill him. 2 if he doesn't block the Sky Shadows. So, really, I think we've got this, unless he's sitting on something I don't know about, or something I haven't considered. So, here we go. Just swinging for the game. I don't care if he blocks or not. And the question is, does he have it? He has an Arise, but I don't think this works the way he wants it to. Yeah, because the Sand Soldier has nowhere to go. It never works the way my opponents think it does, so I think we actually got it. He went for the Arise, and he wasn't able to do it. We're going to cheese this one out thanks to the Nightshade Stalker, and I didn't want the Nightshade Stalker because I was like, it can't block, it's ephemeral. But in this situation, being able to play this card endlessly and into an opponent who has so many landmarks that his board is super clogged and he can't have enough blocks, we're able to cheese through enough damage. So really love it when a plan comes together there. Who needs Aphelios? We're going to be able to make it happen regardless. So anyways, just super happy we were able to cheese that one out, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the deck. If you guys have any, like, deck building tips or, like, playing tips as well, if you want to leave that down in the comment section below, I would love to hear it. I'm sure sometimes the way I play just kills you guys, so if I'm doing something particularly boneheaded, let me know that down in the comment section below, and let me know which part of this episode you enjoyed, guys. I'm really trying to figure out how I can structure this series best for you, so let me know all of that. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload videos like this every Sunday, and also traditional League of Legends content on Mondays, Fridays, and patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.